first, you and I are libertarians. I think government schooling is a disaster, has been a disaster. I think in the 19th century, they were able to sell people on, hey, universal reading, writing, math are good, reading, writing, arithmetic. So school in the 19th century, the common school movement in the 19th century started out with a couple of hours a day, a couple of months a year, couple of years of education, just reading, writing, math, the basics. And, that was a camel's nose under the tent. There was a plausible rationale for that. I expect you would agree we could have done it privately, but okay, reading, writing, math. But then gradually the school day became longer, the school year became longer, and more years of education were required. In my belief, and then also localism, it used to be one-room schoolhouse, very locally controlled. So even it was, in some sense, government was basically a community school. In the 20th century, things became dramatically more bureaucratic. So we went from 200,000 school districts in 1920 to just 20,000 school districts in 1970. So government basically controlled education and then layers of federal control on top of that by the late 20th century. Public choice theory 101, government control leads to disaster. In particular, I think that whatever grounds there were for teaching elementary children reading, writing, math, the academic school was never a good fit for high school students, or what we call high school students. We would call them young adults. So, in every society in history, at puberty, 12, 13, you have a rite of passage. You go off, in indigenous tribes, you go off and hunt with the men, gather with women. Or in early U.S., Ben Franklin, Andrew Carnegie, Thomas Edison, all these people started working at 13. And it used to be normal for teenagers, what we now call teenagers, to be responsible adults in the world. The term teenager and adolescent are 20th century inventions. This is a whole category of human being that didn't exist before. And then it was only in the 1930s that a majority of students began taking high school. And then only by the 1950s that a majority began graduating from high school. So the whole high school phenomenon is extremely recent by historical standards. It's not an accident that the whole notion of teenage rebellion became a trope in the 50s and 60s and so forth. In the 19th century, you're out working. There's no teenage rebellion kind of thing. And so I think enforcing these incredibly powerful, active young people into 30 students in a room, passive all day long, was a recipe for disaster. Teenage suicide, and there's a lot of attention to the fact that teenage suicide has gone up in recent years, probably accelerated by social media. What people don't realize is teenage suicide is up 300% since the 1950s. And that was, by 1990, it was up about 300% already. So the biggest increase in teenage suicide was not due to cell phones. It's due to public school, I would say, taking the life out of these kids, literally. So when we ask why things are awful, well, it was a bad idea from the get-go to force all these energetic young people into cages for the best years of their life. Quick riff on the cages. Famous rat cage experiment where they got rats addicted to cocaine in cages. They let them out in a rat park. The rats go out in the park. They don't care about the cocaine anymore. Caging people is just not a good idea. And so what do we get? Combine that with the almost impossibility for moral formation. I think one of the things that people don't realize is school does not form morals. Pop culture is basically forming the morals. So if you don't have parents really formal morals, we're no longer a very religious society. And school is basically relativistic or, worse. Then you have Andrew Tate and porn and social media slop and just stupid TikTok videos all day, gaming, first-person shooter gaming and whatnot. The souls of our children are being formed by crap. Schools bore the crap out of them. Parents are lost. I could go on, but that's where we get it dark. Just to spin back to the positive side.
So it's almost like a nexus. It's almost like a not one phenomenon, multiple factors that go into this I guess adolescent pathology. Or so you have this almost ping-ponging between a digital prison and by evening, and then by day they're being warehoused in this excessively standardized 5x5 chairs, sit still, sit up and pay attention, that sort of stuff. And and in some contexts, there's almost like this pressure to perform, to push the lever to get the pellet in terms of the education outcomes. So all of that adds up with adolescent mental health problems. Is that more or less what you mean?
All true.
Or yeah.
I want to add layers. Another layer
Mhm.
is a fan of Alistair McIntyre's After Virtue. And my read on that is all cultures around the world were basically virtue cultures until the 20th century. That is, whether you're talking about the Cherokee or, Papua New Guinea or Catholics in the Middle Ages, whatever it was, young people were raised with a standard of excellence. There was a common culture, common norms, common rituals, and the young men they had a template for how to behave as young men. What does it mean to go out and hunt your first deer, or to, go out and sell your first, gadget, or whatever it is, even to go to work on the factory, whatever it is, this is what it meant to be an adult. And in many ways, the background, you're a philosopher as well, the relativism. So just as we entered the 20th century and we have they're caged in public schools and the entertainment slop is overwhelming them, we get cultural relativism at the same time. Our elites, and there's another kind of indictment of academia, they no longer believe in a norm of excellence. They're no longer transmitting an aspirational way to behave in the world. Instead, this goes back to the Marxists. They're undermining all norms of decency, where they aggressively attack bourgeois morality. And so, yeah, it's a perfect storm in so many ways. I think the positive thing is once parents realize it doesn't have to be this way, and this is why I'm big on homeschooling, unschooling, alternative schooling, microschooling, private schooling, religious schooling, military schooling. As soon as parents realize, no, I could put my child in an environment where they do care about my child's, soul and spirit and intention and excellence and role models and heroes and the narratives we tell them and all of these things. Again, let 1,000 schools bloom. I see thanks to educational scholarship accounts, ESAs, a renaissance in the United States, because I see thousands and then millions of parents pouring out of the public schools and finally relearning how to raise our children. I like to talk of the dark century from 1950 to 2050, when most students were in public high schools. And if we can get most students out of public high schools by 2050, we'll no longer be destroying the souls of generations of teenagers.
And we'll get to return to a condition of experimentation over standardization, because it's really in those feedback loops, that discovery process of education and interaction, that where the good stuff is. I hesitate to use this metaphor because because plants are so passive. But if you think of it as being like a greenhouse or a garden, there are different flowers, different plants have different needs, more or less sunlight, more or less food, water, and so on. And standardization tends to be this amount of water, this amount of sunlight, and so on, with such regularity that it assumes that every child is an orchid. If you let me beat the metaphor up.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're saying is we need 1,000 experiments, 1,000 different approaches for the particular developmental paths of different unique kids. And I think that's wonderful.